Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Something is wrong. One of the demigods that was waiting for his turn to enter the portal said with a frown. Indeed, another demigod commented. A person is about to enter here from Solais. Such a stupid move. A demigod with a single horn on his head commented. I'm sure he will piss his pants the moment he sees what is waiting for him on this side of the portal. The demigods chuckled because they found this fact amusing. Stand aside, the demigod with a single horn on his head stated. I'll personally deal with this stupid individual. Without another word, he leaped high through the air and landed dozens of meters away from the purple portal. He then crossed his hands over his chest and sneered. He really wanted to see how the trespasser would react after seeing that he had made the biggest mistake in his life. A moment later, Lux appeared in front of them. When he saw that there were countless abyssal creatures waiting for him on the other side, a frown appeared on his face. He had already sensed that there were several demigods in the surroundings, including the one-horned demon that was looking at him with a sneer plastered on his face. Welcome, mortal, to the abyss, the one-horned demon said. I will give you exactly 5 seconds to kneel and beg for mercy. If you do that, I will consider making you one of my slaves. Aren't I benevolent? Lux ignored the one-horned demon's words and continued to scan the surroundings. He could feel someone stronger than the demon in front of him, and he was confirming if he was just imagining things or not. Seeing that the mortal wasn't paying any attention to him, the other demigods laughed at the one-horned demigod, making the latter's face turn red in anger. Foolish half-elf, the one-horned demon growled. Since you do not wish to kneel for mercy, then it's time for you to die. Just before the one-horned demon could finish his words, Lux threw the 2 blast bombs in his hand towards the demigod before summoning Hannah to his side. Without another word, the fox lady grabbed her master and used her spatial magic to teleport several times in quick succession to distance themselves from the explosion that would soon take place. Angered by Lux's actions, the one-horned demigod used his hand to slash at the 2 blast bombs that were flying in his direction. He didn't take the 2 projectiles too seriously because he didn't believe that anything that half-elf possessed could hurt him. That was a mistake. A very big mistake. As soon as his hands made contact with the 2 blast bombs, they exploded. The abyssal land shook, and an eruption that extended for miles instantly annihilated any monster below the calamity rank. Even after using several spatial jumps, Lux and Hannah were still blown away by the aftermath of the explosion. Fortunately, the impact wasn't that strong, so neither of them received any injuries. The 2 stared at the mushroom cloud in the distance and waited for a full minute before going back to look for survivors. A scene of carnage appeared in front of them. The one-horned demigod stood in the center of a giant crater, with half of his body burned to a crisp. He had received a very fatal injury, and it was only a matter of time before he perished. The one-horned demigod didn't think that he would die this kind of death. Everything happened so fast, and before he knew it, his world was bathed in blazing flames, annihilating anything in its path. Aiko's blast bombs had been modified to be able to seriously injure any demigod creature it came in contact with. But the main reason why the one-horned demon was dying was not only due to its destructive power. Lux had imbued the 2 blast bombs with his divine abyssal touch, raising its lethality to the next level. Even if the demigod had managed to survive the nuclear-level explosion, his soul would suffer serious injuries from it. And this was exactly what had happened with the one-horned demigod. After looking at the half-elf for the last time, the demigod's body swayed as he fell on the ground. It was at that moment when a black coffin appeared and devoured the precious demigod that would become Lux's future powerhouse. The other demigods, who managed to survive the blast, looked at the half-elf with caution in their eyes. Their bodies hadn't received any injuries because they were able to react in time, but their souls were a bit shaken by the aftermath of the explosion. After seeing that the number of abyssal monsters had been greatly reduced, Lux threw 2 more blast bombs, aiming at the places where the survivors had gathered. The demigods and the calamity-ranked monsters that had managed to defend themselves on time immediately retreated because their lives depended on it. Those that managed to survive the first blast were unable to run, even if they wanted to. Their injuries were severe, and there was no hope for them to escape a second time. The 70th floor of the abyss shook as the two blast bombs detonated in two separate locations. Just like what they did earlier, Lux once again escaped alongside Hannah, using hit-and-run tactics against their stronger opponents. Lux might be an S-ranker, but he couldn't possibly fight several demigods head-on. Because of this, he planned to reduce their numbers as much as possible and fight them after they had received serious injuries from Aiko's blast bombs. Did we get them all? Lux asked Hannah, who was observing the scorched battlefield with her spatial magic. Yes, Hannah replied. But, just as expected, fighting demigods is tough. The only saving grace is that they are now reluctant to face you head-on, in fear of Aiko's blast bombs. Lux smiled after hearing the beautiful fox lady's report. This was exactly what he was aiming for. As long as the demigods were reluctant to fight him, he would gain the upper hand in this battle. But his smile disappeared when he felt a powerful force sweep away the black smoke that had covered the battlefield. The half-elf stared at a man wearing black robes, who was staring back at him with a frown. "You," the black-robed man said as he pointed at Lux. "You came from Earth, right?" Although the two of them were a distance away from each other, he and Hannah could hear the man's words crystal clear. "I see." Lux narrowed his eyes. "You must be that champion who tried to ascend into godhood." The black-robed man snorted. "The name is Daniel. Remember this, for I will be the one to end your life. Make sure to give your gods my regards after I send you to the afterlife." The half-elf could feel a strong aura emanating from Daniel, which made his body stiffen due to how oppressive it was. Hannah, who was standing beside him, couldn't help but shudder after sensing a power that transcends that of a demigod. Her master had already informed her that the one that was holding one of the pillars of eternity was someone that had tried to ascend into godhood in the past but failed. Now that she was seeing the person that her master had talked about, she felt as if she was staring at the personification of death itself. She had a feeling that no matter how many blast bombs Lux threw at Daniel, none of them would be able to reach him due to the sheer power that was emanating from his body. "Let's ignore him for now," Lux said to Hannah through telepathy. "Let's deal with the other demigods first. They must not be allowed to enter the portal." The half-elf knew that even in their weakened state, the saints that were fighting on Solais would be unable to fight against them due to the disparity in rank. If he hadn't divided his forces, he might have managed to subdue them faster. But he was also thankful that he had split his forces. Right now, he was fighting against a pseudo-god, a being that was stronger than a demigod. Just as they were about to teleport and target the other demigods, Lux and Hannah found themselves stuck in place. It was as if they were in a quagmire that they couldn't get away from, greatly restricting their movements. Hannah was alarmed because she was unable to use her spatial ability to teleport the two of them away to safety. Sensing that he would have to forcefully break away from their predicament, Lux decided to use his strongest ability. Deus Gigantia. A gigantic skeleton king that stood over 100 meters tall appeared behind the half-elf. The gem on its chest glowed faintly and transported the half-elf, as well as Hannah, inside of it. "Oh, not bad," Daniel said as he looked at the towering skeleton king. "But not good enough." Without another word, he raised his hand and the dozens of demigods that had tried to escape earlier were instantly teleported to his side. "If all of you don't want to die, fight him," Daniel ordered. "Those who run away will be killed by my hand." The demigods were very reluctant to fight Lux because they didn't want to suffer the same fate as the one-horned demigod that had underestimated their opponent. However, none of them also dared to defy Daniel, who could kill them with a snap of his finger, especially after they were forced to submit to him. The pseudo-god had embedded a powerful seal in their hearts, which he could activate at any given time. Just a thought was enough for this seal to obliterate their hearts, killing them from the inside out. Left with no other alternatives, all the demigods charged at Lux with the intention of dying alongside him. After becoming an S-ranker, the Skeleton King had become a peak calamity-ranked world boss. Although it had become a lot stronger, it was simply no match against a dozen demigods, despite the fact that they had suffered soul injuries from Aiko's blast bombs. But that was fine. This was the perfect scenario that Lux was waiting for. "Hannah, now," Lux ordered. The fox lady nodded and grabbed hold of Lux's body. A moment later, they disappeared from the blue gem that was located on the chest of the Skeleton King. Even without Lux, the Skeleton King had no problems moving autonomously. Its master's safety was its priority, so not having him around was a good thing, especially because of what it was about to do. The moment the demigods was about to crush its body, the Skeleton King detonated the blast bombs that Lux had placed in different parts of its body, creating a world-shaking eruption that nearly split the 70th floor apart. Lux had used dozens of nuclear-level blast bombs, emptying more than half of his stock. He couldn't allow a single demigod to survive, so he took the gamble and prayed for it to succeed. The 70th floor was covered in hellish flames, the likes it had never seen before. The two explosions that Lux had orchestrated at the beginning of the battle couldn't compare to the pure, raw destruction that was brought down by dozens of blast bombs, detonating at the same time. Lux was even hoping that the explosion was able to injure Daniel at the same time. As long as he was weakened, he might be able to use the rest of his blast bombs to the best of his ability. After a few minutes, the raging blaze that seemed unending was split apart in half and dispersed completely. Standing at the hellish landscape of fire and magma was none other than Daniel, who looked perfectly fine, despite the fact that none of the demigods were able to survive. Blackfire had no opportunity to collect bodies because there were no bodies to collect. "Master, I think we should escape," Hannah said in an anxious tone. "We cannot defeat him. It is impossible." "I understand, Hannah," Lux replied. "But where can we run?" "Master, did you forget?" Hannah said softly. "He can't leave the abyss. If we return to Solais, he will not be able to do anything to us." Lux had momentarily forgotten this fact because of how surprised he was that Daniel had remained free of injury despite everything that had happened. He didn't dare fight the pseudo-god head-on, and his Deus Gigantea had also been destroyed by the explosion. Summoning the Skeleton King had a cool-down time of an hour. Since that was the case, he couldn't use the same tactic. Also, he didn't believe that the same trick would work against his opponent. "Let's go, Hannah," Lux stated. "Take me to the portal." "Yes, master," Hannah replied, and immediately used her power to teleport in front of the purple portal, which would let them return to Solais. Daniel, who understood what they were planning to do, sneered. "Since you want to run away, then so be it," Daniel stated, making sure that Lux hears it. "I'll just erase you and Solais at the same time." At that exact moment, a silhouette that made Lux and Hannah shudder materialized behind the black-robed man. Antero and his Skeleton King were the biggest creatures that Lux had seen in his lifetime. But neither of them could compare to the sheer size of the creature that was hovering behind Daniel. For a brief moment, the entirety of the 70th floor collapsed, allowing Lux and Hannah to see the being that made them look like specks of dust in the universe. "Behold, the power that will end all of your futile struggles," Daniel stated. "I didn't plan to use this earlier since I thought that simply destroying Solais without making the people inside of it suffer would be boring. But you made me change my mind." The silhouette of the grotesque creature behind Daniel slowly opened the single eye on its body. "Kyoza!" Lux roared as he activated the dragon token in his hand. Deep inside, he knew that even with the crystal dragon's help, fighting against such a thing was impossible. However, he still decided to try, knowing that if he didn't ask for his help one last time, he would never get an opportunity to use it again. The crystal dragon roared and appeared behind Lux. Kyoza was at least 50 meters tall, and his rank had jumped to the peak of the demigod rank. Every time the dragon token was used, Kyoza was able to slowly regain his former powers from his peak. Staring at the outer god, whom even the gods dared not to face, the crystal dragon spread its wings wide and roared in defiance. "Lux, listen to me," Kyoza stated. "No matter what happens, we must not let that outer god's attack reach Solais." "You know about him?" Lux asked in surprise because he didn't expect Kyoza to recognize the being that was bigger than an entire planet. "Yes. Its name is Azathoth," Kyoza replied. an outer god who was sealed at the deepest level of the abyss. What you are seeing right now is just a manifestation of its strength. It's not really him, but an avatar of sorts that is being used by that person who once tried to ascend into godhood. It seems that he was able to harness a small portion of the outer god's power, who is still sleeping at the lowest level of the abyss. Lux couldn't help but clench his fist when he heard that what he was seeing was only a small portion of the outer god's power. This is just a small portion of its power? Lux's heart was beating wildly inside his chest. It's more than enough to destroy Elysium and Solais with a single attack, and this is just a small portion of its power? I know it's hard to believe, but it is the truth, Kyoza replied. Now, brace yourself. It's about to unleash its attack. We only have one shot at this. Hannah, return to Solais, Lux ordered. Tell the others to get as far away as they can from the portal. But I can't leave you here, Master, Hannah stated. You staying here will not make any difference, Lux replied. Go, Hannah. Make sure to tell everyone to escape as far away as they can. Please. The fox lady bit her lip, drawing blood as she turned around to jump into the purple portal to carry out her master's order. She knew that Lux was right. Even if she stayed, there was nothing she could do to help him. She was hurt by his words, but she also recognized that this was also her master's way of telling her to escape and save her life. Lux took a deep breath and summoned his clones. All of them then transformed into their demi-dragon form. Behind them, the images of several dragons appeared. A fire dragon, a golden dragon, a crystal dragon. Lux, on the other hand, didn't call out the power of dragons. He gathered all of his power in his hands as he prepared to unleash his strongest attack using all the power inside his body. It was none other than his skill, Death Sentence, which he hadn't used even once since it was given to him. This skill was his last resort because after using it, he would become drained and unable to even lift a finger. His clones were not able to use this ability because it went beyond what they were capable of. He had tried it in the past, but before the clones could even activate the skill, all of them exploded into a shower of golden sparks as if they were unable to handle the load of this attack. Kyoza spread his wings and prepared to attack as well. But before he did that, he shifted his consciousness to both Solais and Elysium. Alexander, Maximilian, Hannah, Keen, and Gerhardt instantly turned into crystal statues. Aurelia and her mother, Queen Evangeline, also transformed into crystal statues. After doing this, the crystal dragon gathered all the strength it could muster for one final breath attack. That's it, Daniel smiled as he looked at the desperate faces of the opponents in front of him. Struggle and despair. Understand that from the very start, none of you can stop the inevitable. The silhouette of Azathoth behind him had fully opened its eyes. Daniel's body was bathed in a reddish light, giving him strength beyond his wildest imagination. Disappear alongside Solais. Daniel raised his right hand, aiming it at Lux and the purple portal behind him. Regret the fact that you have chosen to become a dog of the gods. Nuclear chaos. Daniel unleashed a giant beam of red light that seemed to devour everything in his path. Crystal Dragon King's breath. Kyoza roared as he unleashed his strongest crystal breath attack. Lux's clones also unleashed their own breath attacks, merging with Kyoza's own, empowering it. Death Sentence. Lux shouted as he also unleashed a beam of deathly energy that contained all of the power inside his body. It also merged with Kyoza's breath attack, which collided with Daniel's skill, Nuclear Chaos. For a brief moment, Lux's and Kyoza's attack managed to hold off the deadly skill that would erase everything in its path. This lasted for a few seconds before Daniel's attack started to slowly push their attack back, visibly overpowering it. Lux growled as he channeled everything he had in this attack. But even with his everything, they were still being pushed back. Daniel laughed because he was enjoying Lux's suffering. However, he knew that he would not be able to sustain the outer god's power for long because it was taking a toll on his body. This is the end, Daniel stated. Goodbye, half-elf. The red beam's size increased, overpowering Lux's and Kyoza's attack completely. The crystal dragon roared one last time and transformed into a dragon token. He then flew towards Lux's chest, turning the half-elf into a crystal statue. This was Kyoza's last attempt to protect Lux, but he knew deep inside that this was just wishful thinking. Suddenly, a roar filled with anger reverberated in the heavens. "I won't let you have your way." The gambling god, Max, threw a black dice that merged with Lux's body. He couldn't possibly stand by and watch the half-elf die in the hands of the pseudo-god, who was hellbent on destroying the things that they were trying to protect. The god of games, Ariel, pressed his hands together and appeared behind Lux. Since an outer god was fighting against a mortal, the restrictions that bound them were temporarily lifted, allowing them to join the battle for a brief period of time. Daniel looked at Ariel and Max with disdain as his attack collided with the half-elf, who had become a crystal statue. At first, he thought that the statue would be obliterated, but it held strong and endured his attack. But Daniel wasn't done yet. He further increased the power of the blast and slowly pushed the crystal statue towards the portal. His intention was clear. He would destroy Lux, as well as Solais at the same time. Since Lux was unable to move, his body was helplessly pushed towards the portal until he disappeared completely. Ariel, who was waiting for that moment, shouted, unleashing the power of his divinity. The crystal statue, which was traveling between the abyss and Elysium, glowed brightly like a sun. A moment later, a powerful ripple expanded from his body, spreading across the entirety of Solais, encompassing even that of Elysium. Suddenly, countless shockwaves erupted in different places of Solais and Elysium, destroying the abyssal gates that were still spewing hordes of abyssal monsters from the abyss. No one knew how this happened, but one thing was clear. With the abyssal gates closed, no more abyssal monsters could enter either world, which was currently facing off against the abyssal monsters that had already descended into their worlds. 10 minutes before Lux clashed with Daniel, Iris, Kai, and Aurora, who were currently inside the underground shelter in Barbados Academy, felt the strong fluctuation of power that came from the abyssal gate even though they were deep underground. Because of this, they also knew that their loved ones were already fighting against the threat that had descended upon their world. Aurora, who was a half-succubus, could feel her bloodline reacting inside of her body. After being embraced by Lux, she was able to control her abyssal power, allowing her to hide her horns, wings, and tail. However, as the power of the abyss spread itself into the world, she could feel her power stir, threatening to take control over her senses. But Aurora remained strong, and she put a tight leash on it, preventing it from breaking out of her control. After a few minutes, she finally regained her calm, and her breathing was no longer as ragged as before. Iris and Kai, who were aware of her condition, looked at her with concern. But after seeing that Aurora's complexion had now become a bit better, both of them knew that the worst part was finally over. "Do you think Lux will be all right?" Henrietta, who was also with them, asked. "This presence I'm feeling is truly strong, stronger than a saint." "He'll be fine," Kai, who was in her boar form, replied in a heartbeat. "This is Lux we're talking about. I'm sure that Blackfire is currently having a field day, devouring demigods left and right." Iris and Aurora, who were also worried about their lover, smiled after hearing Kai's answer. They knew that with the forces under his command, there would be very few individuals who would be able to hold their grounds against him. This included the Divine Army of Light, whom Lux had a grudge with. Somewhere in Elysium, Aina, who was in her Angel of Vengeance form, was busy killing abyssal creatures left and right. Asmodeus, who had been tasked to keep her safe, had already summoned Morpheus and Ithaqua, who had summoned a blizzard, greatly hindering the lower-ranked abyssal creatures from putting up a good fight. They didn't know whether they were lucky or unlucky, but the strongest opponents that they were currently facing were calamity-ranked abyssal monsters. However, this threat was already being dealt with by the calamity-ranked monsters that Lux had assigned to protect Aina in the Xeno Empire. "Don't go deep behind enemy lines, Aina," Asmodeus cautioned. "As long as you stay within our formation, we will be able to deal with any variables that might arise." "Understood, Asmodeus," Aina replied. "How is Lux faring? You are connected to him, right?" "You don't have to worry about Master," Asmodeus replied. "He's fine." Aina nodded before attacking the nearest dreadnought-ranked monster, who was giving the army of the Xeno Empire a hard time. Asmodeus looked at his master's lover with a complicated look on his face. He didn't tell Aina that Lux was currently facing off against a pseudo-god, which was several times stronger than a demigod. The Lich King was very tempted to return to his master's side in order to help him. However, he resisted this urge. He knew that if something bad happened to Aina, Lux wouldn't be able to forgive him. When will this battle end? Asmodeus clicked his tongue in annoyance as he looked at the purple gate that was still spewing monsters into the middle of the blizzard. Due to Ithaqua's blizzard, they were able to disorient the newcomers and deal a devastating blow to them before they even knew what hit them. Ithaqua had bestowed its allies with perfect vision, allowing them to see through the blizzard without any difficulty. Suddenly, Asmodeus' body shuddered. He could sense that his master was in great danger. However, when he attempted to teleport to his side, he realized that he was unable to do so. It was as if some kind of barrier was preventing him from going to his master's side, and this frustrated the Lich King, who was the main strategist and general assigned to protect the Xeno Empire. "Please be safe, Master," Asmodeus prayed, despite knowing that the only gods that could hear his prayer were Ariel and Max. This was how worried he was about Lux's well-being, as the latter was currently channeling every bit of his strength in order to defend against Daniel's attack, which he called nuclear chaos. Suddenly, a faint ripple washed over everyone on the battlefield. It was very subtle, and only those with strong perceptions were able to feel it. Aina and Asmodeus had felt it. The calamity-ranked monsters who were fighting to protect the dwarven army also felt it. A few seconds later, several powerful shock waves blew everyone away, not caring whether it hit the abyssal invaders or the defenders in its wake. This phenomenon happened all over Elysium and Solais, taking everyone by surprise. Aina, who was in the midst of battle, grabbed her head with both hands because she felt an excruciating pain inside her head, making her scream. Gathering the power inside her body, she created a protective dome around her, negating the effects of whatever was trying to tamper with her mind. "Lux," Aina muttered as she looked at Asmodeus with panic. Something happened to Lux. She didn't know why, but the overwhelming headache that she had just experienced was somehow related to the half-elf, whom she held dear in her heart. Asmodeus, who was commanding everyone, stopped moving as if he was frozen in place. The Lich King, whose heart had stopped beating long ago, felt a heartache that transcended all the pain he had felt in his life. A moment later, he swayed from his spot and almost fell on his back. Fortunately, he managed to regain his control over his body using sheer willpower, preventing him from falling unconscious. The Lich King's gaze then shifted to the purple portal, which was slowly decreasing in size with each passing second. A minute later, the portal completely disappeared, which meant that there would no longer be any more abyssal creatures that would descend upon the Xeno Empire. "Kill all the abyssal monsters as fast as you can," Asmodeus ordered. "Leave none of them alive." Asmodeus had decided to return to Lux's side the moment they had annihilated every abyssal creature in the surroundings. Barbados Academy. Iris, Kai, Aurora, and Henrietta were all on their knees as they held their heads at the same time. They were in so much pain that tears were falling down from their eyes. A minute later, the pain disappeared, leaving the four ladies panting for breath. "Something happened to Lux." Aurora stood up shakily. "I need to go to him." "Aurora, where do you think you're going?" Iris hurriedly grabbed the young lady, preventing her from going anywhere. "The abyssal monsters are still at large. If you go, you will just endanger yourself." "I must go. Lux needs my help." Aurora tried to pry away Iris' hand, which was holding onto her wrist. "Calm down," Iris insisted. "Who is this Lux you're talking about?" Aurora, who was struggling to free herself from Iris' grasp, looked at her friend in disbelief. "Iris, if this is a joke, it's not funny," Aurora said as she looked at the boar beside them. "Kai, tell her that this isn't the time for jokes." "Aurora, I know that this may sound weird, but I also want to ask you who Lux is." Kai asked. "Is he your friend?" "Why you?" Aurora was now getting angry. She could still forgive her sisters if they admitted that they were joking, But after seeing how serious they were, the pink-haired lady was starting to feel anxious inside her heart. Iris, let Aurora go, Henrietta said softly. Can't you see she's starting to get anxious? I'll talk to her, so remain here with Kai. Iris reluctantly released Aurora because she also didn't understand why she was acting this way. In the end, she allowed Henrietta to take her friend away and stayed beside Kai, who had a very confused look on her face. Do you know who Lux is? Kai asked. Aurora looks very upset that we seem to not know of him. Iris didn't reply right away as she pressed her hand over her wildly beating heart. Although she didn't know anyone named Lux, she felt as if she had lost something very important to her in her heart. Henrietta, who had taken Aurora near the exit of the shelter, looked at her with a solemn expression on her face. Aurora, my head is still hurting right now, and I am barely able to recall things, Henrietta stated. I do remember someone named Lux. However, I can't remember his face. Even so, I can tell that he is someone very important to you. You can go to his side. I will tell Iris and Kai that I took you to the infirmary to calm them down. Thank you, Henrietta, Aurora replied before hurriedly running towards the exit of the shelter. She didn't know why Iris and Kai had completely forgotten about Lux and why Henrietta could only remember his name. It was at that moment that she remembered the talk she had with her lover after the two of them had finished consummating their love for each other. Erase, Aurora muttered. His existence will be erased. After this realization, Aurora opened her wings and flew in the direction where she could feel the fluctuation of abyssal energy. She didn't know how or when it happened, but her speed had broken through the sound barrier, allowing her to fly at extreme speeds. Several minutes later, she finally arrived at her destination, and it was a scene of carnage. All the abyssal creatures had been killed, and Lux's summons, including the calamity-ranked monsters, were gathered around a giant block of crystal that was at least 30 meters tall. Avernus, who recognized Aurora, ordered the creatures to make a path for her. When the young lady saw who was frozen at the center of the giant crystal, she felt a stabbing pain in her chest as if she was being stabbed by countless knives. She walked towards the crystal with her hands covering her mouth and her tears falling down like rain. Her lover, who had promised to take her to beautiful places in Elysium, was frozen inside the crystal. Aurora was very sensitive to life force, and a single glance was enough for her to tell that the heart of the love of her life was no longer beating. Lux was no longer breathing, and she couldn't even feel his soul within his body. A moment later, a wail filled with sadness and pain reverberated in the surroundings as the young lady, who had just felt what it was like to fall in love, broke down in a river of despair and tears. /N. It is at times like this when you should put your trust in me. You are in good hands. This captain will sail you through this stormy sea without fail. We are at the endgame now, Karshvar Draconis. Valerie and Ollie lost their consciousness after experiencing the worst headache of their life. Ari, who barely managed to retain her consciousness, immediately summoned the other handmaidens to take Valerie and Ollie to the royal infirmary. She was quite shaken by what just transpired, and she had no idea why it had happened. The only thing she knew was that she was unable to think properly at the moment due to the pain that still persisted inside of her head. Half an hour later, the pain she was feeling had faded, but Valerie and Ollie were still unconscious. The doctor who had checked their vital signs said that everything was normal. Perhaps the shock wave we experienced earlier made the two of them feel disoriented, making them lose their consciousness, the doctor explained to Queen Saphira, who was holding her daughter's hand with worry. I'm sure that they will regain their consciousness soon, so you don't have to feel anxious, Your Majesty. Thank you, Doctor, Queen Saphira replied. You may take your leave. I will call you if something happens. The doctor nodded and left the infirmary to return to the front lines. Several dragons and dragonborns were injured due to the ongoing battle against the abyssal creatures, and they needed all the help that they could get in order to repel the invaders that had dared to appear within their territory. Ari held Ali's hand as the latter was also knocked unconscious by the headache that they felt earlier. Suddenly, the eyes of her sister slowly opened, making Ari immediately hug her out of worry. Why, you're heavy, Ari, Ali said after being hugged out of the blue. Get off me. Ari refused to budge, and ended up crying while clinging to her sister. The two of them were orphans, so their bond was extremely strong. If something really happened to Ali, Ari wouldn't know what to do because her sister was the only family member she had left in this world. Valerie, who was on the other bed, also started to stir. The first person that the dragon princess saw was her mother, who was looking at her with worry. "Mother?" Valerie asked and tried to stand up. However, she winced and placed her hand on her head, trying to lessen the pain that she was feeling. "My head, it hurts." "Does it hurt?" Queen Saphira immediately placed her hand over Valerie's head and used a bit of her healing magic. "Just relax. I will help you remove the pain." Valerie obeyed and closed her eyes. Her mother's touch made her feel safe and protected, just like the touch of that person. "That person?" Valerie thought. "Who is that person?" The dragon princess was greatly confused. She felt as if she had forgotten something important, but when she tried to recall it, the pain would return, making her wince in pain. In the end, Valerie stopped thinking about it, and the pain went away. "Are you feeling better?" Queen Saphira asked after she removed her hand from Valerie's head. "Yes, mother," Valerie replied. "I am feeling a lot better now." "Good. Just rest here. The war is still ongoing. I will stay here and protect you, okay?" "Mm. Thank you, mother." Valerie then shifted his gaze to Ari, who was hugging Ali like a koala, refusing to let go. The dragon princess couldn't help but giggle after seeing this scene. She didn't really know what had happened to her and Ali, but she was glad that she was no longer feeling any pain inside her head. "I hope this war ends soon," Valerie thought. "I'd like to visit or and play with him for a bit." Crystal Palace. Two crystal statues, which were right beside each other, started to form cracks in their surface. Half a minute later, the crystals crumbled to pieces and disappeared as if they had never been there in the first place. Aurelia looked at her mother in surprise. Queen Evangeline, on the other hand, had a frown on her beautiful face. She briefly heard her husband's voice before she was encased in crystal. Truth be told, it was impossible for crystal dragons to turn into crystal statues because they were already made up of crystal. The only way for them to enter this state was for a truly powerful crystal dragon, who had the authority of a dragon king, to use their power to encase their bodies in crystal. Aurelia and Queen Evangeline could also use this ability as a last resort. It protected their bodies from physical and mental attacks, allowing them to survive a blow that could otherwise kill them. "Mother, did father?" Aurelia wasn't able to finish whatever she was going to say because Queen Evangeline's finger pressed over her daughter's lips, preventing her from speaking. "Your father always has a reason for doing things," Queen Evangeline stated. "Since he acted like this, it meant that he had shielded us from something that might have otherwise harmed us." Aurelia nodded her head in understanding. Even from the Crystal Palace, she could feel the sound of loud explosions happening in the distance. An abyssal gate had appeared in their territory, and currently, Lady Augustina, Picoro, and the floating fortress of Heaven's Gate were in the midst of a battle against the abyssal creatures. Although she still didn't understand why her father protected her mother and her, Aurelia believed that she would know the reason soon enough. 6 kingdoms in Solais. Alexander's, Maximilian's, Keen's, Gerhardt's, and Hannah's crystal statues all broke at the same time. The moment they regained their senses, they heard Aurora's wails of sadness, making them all look in her direction. There, they saw Lux's forces circling a giant block of crystal and a pink-haired beauty crying as she leaned her body against the crystal in front of her. It didn't take long before they realized what had happened. Alexander, Maximilian, and Hannah immediately appeared in front of the crystal. The Saint of Barbados Academy slashed the crystal with his sword, but aside from creating several sparks after the impact of his blow, the surface of the crystal remained clear. Alexander's attack didn't even leave a dent in it. "Stand aside." Maximilian, who was in his giant boar form, charged with the intention of ramming the giant crystal in order to free Lux. They didn't sense any signs of life inside his body. Out of worry, they were desperately trying to break the crystal so that the half-elf could get medical attention as soon as possible. However, even with Maximilian's full-powered charge, the giant crystal was without damage, making the giant boar frown. Please, stand down. A voice filled with divinity reached their ears, making Alexander and Maximilian look at the young man who was hovering beside the giant crystal and looking at them with a pained expression on his face. Ariel's face was pale, and his hand was clutching his chest. He had suffered serious injuries after blocking the attack of the avatar of the outer god, who was still sleeping at the lowest level of the abyss. You will not be able to break this crystal, Ariel explained. And even if you could, you should refrain from doing so. This is the only thing that is keeping Lux's chances of getting revived, so I would greatly appreciate it if all of you would stop doing anything reckless in an attempt to destroy it. Ariel then raised his hand and Kyoza's dragon token appeared on the palm of his hand. With a sigh filled with regret, Ariel tossed the dragon token to the ground. A moment later, a handsome man with long white hair appeared in front of everyone. His blue eyes were filled with sadness as he looked at the half-elf, who was trapped inside the giant crystal and suspended in time. I can't stay for long, so I will let Kyoza explain everything to all of you, Ariel stated. But know this, none of you are allowed to break this crystal. Make sure to let everyone know about it. Ariel gave the crystal one last glance before his entire body turned into particles of light, rising up to the heavens. He and Max had suffered greatly from this clash against the outer god, and both of them needed to rest in order to recover. As to how long their rest would take, Ariel didn't know. He just hoped that the next time he opened his eyes, Solais would still be there. The outer god's attack meant to erase Lux and Solais from the face of the multiverse. The attack that Daniel had unleashed was not ordinary. It was an attack enforced by a powerful law. Since the law that he had used was the law to erase things, Ariel and Max both bent the rule a bit to negate its original purpose. Instead of erasing Lux and Solais, making them cease to exist, what the gods of games and gambling did was to erase Lux from everyone's mind. In short, almost everyone in the world had forgotten him, except for the Supremes, demigods, as well as a handful of individuals who succeeded in preventing their memories from being tampered with. Ariel had also used that opportunity to bend the law of the outer god to erase the gateway that allowed the abyss to invade Elysium and Solais, cutting them off completely. Because of this, no matter what Daniel did, he would be unable to open any gateway that would lead his forces to Elysium and Solais, trapping him in the abyss. All of this was achieved because of the sacrifice of one half-elf, and yet, Ariel and Max felt very bitter about it. As the gods of games and gambling closed their eyes, another god moved in the background. It had sensed the aura of someone familiar to it, so it decided to take a peek at what was happening in the multiverse. Countless glowing golden orbs that resembled eyes shuttled across the weave, peering through the past, present, and future. After a brief investigation, they discovered something interesting, and all of them flocked towards a particular soul, who was floating aimlessly across time and space. Kyoza stood in front of the people gathered around Lux and sighed. Since Ariel had delegated him to become his spokesperson, he decided to tell everyone the current state of things. Lux faced a being that threatened to erase him and Solais from existence, Kyoza stated. However, at the last second, the gods of this world intervened and prevented the worst-case scenario from happening. In exchange, Lux had to pay the price in order to save everyone he cared for. With his soul as an anchor, the gods were able to deflect the outer god's attack, as well as destroy the connection between the abyss and the two worlds, Elysium and Solais. With this, all the abyssal gates were forcefully closed, preventing the rest of the abyssal legion from entering both worlds. Kyoza paused for a bit as he looked at Aurora, who was crying her eyes out before continuing the rest of his explanation. He pitied her, but there was nothing he could do about the current situation. All of you gathered here, the demigods and a handful of people, were spared from the side effects of the god's intervention, Kyoza stated. Aside from those whom I have mentioned, everyone else in the world has forgotten about Lux, even those who hold him very dear in their hearts. Alexander and Maximilian glanced at each other. Worry was reflected in their eyes, and, before they could say anything, Kyoza confirmed their suspicions. Lux's lovers, with the exception of a few, have completely forgotten him, Kyoza said, staring at the two saints. Iris and Kai were two of the ladies who no longer remember him. I'm afraid that even his own mother, Adeline, has forgotten him as well. What about my mother? Alexander asked. Aside from Iris, there was one more person who loved Lux very much and raised him as part of their family. Kyoza sighed before nodding his head. Vera has forgotten him as well. Keen, who had remained silent until now, looked at Kyoza with a solemn expression on his face. If you hadn't shielded us earlier, would we have forgotten him as well? Keen asked. Yes, Kyoza replied in a heartbeat. This divine spell affects everyone below the demigod and supreme rank. Only supremes and demigods who have met Lux in the past will remember him. Gerhardt frowned after hearing Kyoza's reply. How about the guild? Will they forget him too? Kyoza nodded yes. Then, is he really dead? Alexander asked. Truth be told, he didn't want to ask this question. However, he needed to know the answer to this question. Kyoza didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the frozen image of the half-elf inside the giant block of crystal. His heart has stopped, and he is no longer breathing, Kyoza replied. I would like to say that he is indeed dead, but even I am not sure if he is really dead or not. As someone who had conjured the block of crystal, Kyoza was well aware of Lux's condition. The half-elf's current state seemed to be suspended in time. If not for the crystal keeping him in place, his body might have already disintegrated into countless particles. The dice that Max had thrown into his body also helped to keep him intact, allowing his regeneration abilities to increase drastically. This ability was also patching up the half-elf from the inside, creating a better and stronger vessel. There was only one problem. The body no longer had a soul. Perhaps due to the ripple or shock waves that happened afterward, Lux's soul must have been blown away by the explosion. Before Ariel and Max lost consciousness, they told Kyoza that his soul hadn't entered the cycle of reincarnation. This meant that Lux wasn't technically dead, but his soul was somewhere out there, and no one had any idea where he was. I will be returning to Elysium, Kyoza stated. Just remember this. Do not break this crystal no matter what. Lux's revival depends on it. Do I make myself clear? Everyone nodded their heads in understanding. After giving the crystal one last glance, Kyoza transformed into a dragon token and shot up towards the heavens, leaving Solais and those who cared about the half-elf behind. Asmodeus looked at the battlefield with a serious expression on his face. After confirming that all of the abyssal monsters had been killed, he went to talk to Aina and told her that he would return to Solais. He didn't mention anything about Lux because he didn't know how the young lady would react to the news. I will be leaving the calamity-ranked monsters here to act as guards to be safe, Asmodeus said. If anything happens, contact Aurora right away using the guild chat. Aina nodded. She wanted to ask if everything was fine, but she had a feeling that she wouldn't like the answer to her question. Because of this, she held her tongue and watched as Asmodeus disappeared in front of her. Back in Solais, all of Lux's named creatures and Covenant members gathered. Diablo, Ishtar, Pazuzu, Orion, Asmodeus, Lazarus, All Might, Zagan, Revan, Shax, Nightgaunt, Leoric, Draven, Avernus, Hannah, and Bedivere all looked at their master's body that was frozen in a block of crystal. Even Blackfire hovered beside them with its body bent over, showing its sadness. The fact that we remain here proves that Master is not really dead, Asmodeus stated. As Lux's equal, the Lich King was considered his right-hand man. So, despite the fact that Avernus was stronger than him, he didn't make any effort to usurp Asmodeus' position. I'm sure that all of you had seen a glimpse of his last moments as he fought against that being, Asmodeus said while clenching his fists. Right now, the world is embroiled in a war against the Abyss. We have won our battles, but some places have lost theirs. Elysium will have no choice but to use everything in their arsenal to defeat the invaders that are currently ravaging the land, Asmodeus stated. Of course, the same is happening to Solais as well. However, the miasma that separated the different regions has evolved to the point that it is also poisonous to the denizens of the Abyss. Because of this, we don't have to worry about the safety of the Six Kingdoms, at least for now. Asmodeus paused as he looked at his comrades at arms with a solemn expression on his face. With the exception of Avernus, We are far too weak to contend against calamity-ranked monsters, Asmodeus said. Also, we have no idea when Master will be able to return to his body. What I'm trying to say is that we don't want a repeat of what has happened here today. Master lost because he fought alone. He was forced to split his forces in order to protect the people that he cared for. You already know that a necromancer doesn't fight alone. We should have been there with him, but we couldn't because the circumstances didn't permit us to do that. So, I have a proposal. The fire in Asmodeus' eyes glowed brightly as he looked at his master's subordinates. All of us need to form our own armies, Asmodeus stated. An army that numbers in the hundreds of thousands. A force that will make even demigods quake in fear. Master has a skill that will allow all of us to become one with him. But in our current state, merging with him will not give him any substantial benefits. Sure, he might be able to become a saint if we do that. However, he is fighting against a pseudo-god. A single saint is not enough to defeat that kind of existence. But what if he had millions of subordinates? Do you think he would stand a chance? No one answered his question because they didn't know the answer to it. The answer is, I don't know, Asmodeus stated, because it has never been done in the past. So, what we need to do is to make that a reality. Diablo and the others clenched their fists because they, too, wanted to see how strong their master would be after he merged with all of his subordinates, granting him a power that might even surpass the demigod rank. All of you, go and recruit as many members as you can into your armies, Asmodeus stated. Master is no longer here, so if any of you die, you cannot be revived. Prioritize your survival and flee when necessary. Even if Master returns, you are not allowed to stand by his side until your own army reaches the hundreds of thousands. Only those who manage to reach this number would be allowed to fight with him on the same battlefield. So go. I do not care what methods you use. Only your results matter. Blackfire, who was listening to Asmodeus earlier, disappeared as soon as the Lich King finished talking. After becoming a divine artifact, it could move autonomously away from Lux and appear beside anyone that it considered as its master's ally. Now, more than ever, Blackfire was determined to fill up the 100,000-strong quota. It would travel across Elysium, looking for strong creatures to devour, allowing it to play a role in the battle that was about to come. Diablo and the rest bowed in front of Lux one last time before they, too, went to Elysium. All of them would raise an army of their own, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, so that, when their master returned, they could fight alongside him and show their enemies their unholy might. Lux felt something wet touch his cheek, prompting him to open his eyes. For a brief moment, he was unable to move his body as if he was experiencing sleep paralysis. Although he couldn't move, he was able to see the source of the wetness he was feeling on his cheek, and he didn't know if he should laugh or cry. A little dog, who looked very much like a French bulldog, was licking his cheeks as if it was made of ice cream. However, it didn't take long for Lux to realize that something wasn't right. There were no French bulldogs or any type of dogs in Solais and Elysium. In fact, one could even say that man's best friend didn't exist in those two worlds, so the half-elf couldn't help but wonder if he was dreaming or not. Suddenly, a voice that reminded the half-elf of a soft summer breeze reached his ears. As if a healing spell landed on his body, his paralysis disappeared, allowing him to move. Freed from his shackles, Lux propped himself up to a seating position and lightly patted the French bulldog, who had generously lathered his cheeks with its saliva earlier. However, when he gazed in the direction where the voice came from, his body eased up as he saw a familiar person walking toward him. "Aina, how did you grow to be so tall?" Lux asked. The girl approaching him looked at him with a frown before picking up the leash of her pet, who had run away when she wasn't paying any attention. "I'm sorry, but my name is not Aina," the young lady replied. "You might have mistaken me for someone else. Also, did my dog perhaps assault you? Are you hurt somewhere? I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings." Before I knew it, Peanut had already run away. Lux blinked once, then twice as he carefully observed the young lady in front of him, who seemed to be in her early 20s. She was wearing a white dress and a white hat, which made her look like an angel that had descended from the heavens to guide his soul to the cycle of reincarnation. At that moment, the half-elf recalled his battle against Daniel, making his body break out from his daze. "Did I die?" Lux asked the young lady in front of him. "Oh no, I'm terribly sorry." The young lady immediately took out her phone and dialed an emergency hotline. "Hello? This is an emergency. Can you please send an ambulance to Greenbelt Park? My dog crashed into someone, and he seemed to have injured his MPHH. Lux casually pressed the button to end the call and let go of the young lady as soon as he could. "I'm sorry," Lux apologized. "I'm all right. I'm just a bit disoriented." After saying those words, he looked around to gain a better understanding of his surroundings. He heard the young lady, who looked like Aina, say that they were in Greenbelt Park, which sounded familiar and unfamiliar to him at the same time. The French bulldog, who was named Peanut, started to bark at Lux as if he wasn't happy with the way the stranger treated his master. Fortunately, his owner calmed him down, allowing Lux to organize his thoughts. "I'm sorry, I have mistaken you for someone I know," Lux apologized. "Can you answer some of my questions?" "Well, I can. But can you answer my question first?" the young lady asked back. "Are you a cosplayer?" "I'm not," Lux replied. "Wait, did you just say cosplay? Is this Earth?" The young lady took a few steps back because she was starting to think that Lux was one of those crazy people that her manager had warned her about. Seeing her reaction, Lux immediately took a step back in order to not scare her or anything. "I'm not a suspicious person," Lux stated. "That's what all suspicious people say," the young lady replied. Lux scratched his head because he didn't have a rebuttal for her words. However, there was a nagging question that he had wanted to ask the moment he saw the young lady, who looked like Aina. "Are you perhaps Luna?" Lux asked. "You've got the wrong person," the young lady replied as she immediately walked away, dragging Peanut with her. The half-elf didn't know what was going on. But if what he was thinking was right, then he needed to take a leap of faith, and that was what he did. He ran toward the young lady and grabbed her hand. "Please wait," Lux said. "Just answer a few of my questions, and I'll leave you alone." "Let go of me, or I'll call the cops," the young lady struggled. Peanut growled at him, ready to pounce at any time. "Look, I'm sorry." Lux released his hold of the young lady and raised both of his hands in surrender. "I'm still disoriented because your pet crashed into me. I think I hit my head hard on the ground." After hearing his reply, the young lady looked at him with concern. She didn't see everything, but when she finally caught up to Peanut, he saw him licking the body of the young man, who was sprawled on the ground. Peanut, on the other hand, looked at the half-elf as if saying, "Bro, don't do me dirty." The half-elf didn't want to play the victim card, but this was the only thing he could think of in order to make the young lady lower her guard. "I think I have amnesia," Lux said after half a minute. "Can you please tell me what the date is today? Also, what is the name of this city and country?" This was the only thing that he could think of to make the questions he wanted to ask not sound as crazy as they originally would be. "Today? It's December 12th, 2023, the young lady replied. "Where in K City, in Z country?" 2023, Lux muttered. K City in Z country. All of his doubts earlier had been confirmed by the young lady's answer. This was the same city and the same country where he lived back on Earth. Also, if his memory serves him right, it had already been 6 years since he had died and transmigrated into the world of Solais. "Thank you." Lux accepted the tea offered to him by the young lady and held it with both hands. It was warm, and it allowed the half-elf to feel very much alive. He really thought that he was a goner after being hit by Daniel's attack. However, he still wasn't sure if he was dreaming, in limbo, or was trapped inside an illusion. There was simply no way for him to return to Earth, and his current situation made him feel at a loss. Perhaps, seeing how lost he was, the young lady pitied him and invited him to her apartment. Since it was her dog's fault that caused the handsome young man to have amnesia, she felt that she needed to help him in any way she could. Peanut, who was unaware of what his master was thinking, happily ate the dog food on his plate. "Do you remember anything?" the young lady asked. "Perhaps a family name?" Lux shook his head. "You can call me Lux." How should I address you? You can call me Lucy, Lucy said. An awkward silence fell between the two. Lux didn't know how to proceed because he didn't want Lucy to think of him as a lunatic. Lucy, on the other hand, didn't really have many experiences in talking to boys who were near her age. She had stayed in an all-girls school till she graduated, and it was only now that she was starting to talk to people of the other gender. Suddenly, Lux started talking, making her ears perk up. What I'm going to tell you is a story that may or may not be real, Lux stated. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. Lucy looked at the handsome young man who had a very sad expression on his face. There were two sisters who really loved each other, Lux said softly. Both of them had been scouted by many agents, hoping that they would become idols. The two of them rejected these offers until one day, one of the two sisters became sick. Her disease wasn't a simple one, and if she didn't get an operation soon, her chance of survival would be very slim. Because of this, the elder sister decided to become an idol so that she could earn money to let her sister get the treatment she needed to get better. Lucy, who was listening to Lux's story, felt her hands tremble because it was very similar to something that she had experienced in the past. Since she knew that the young man was still not finished with his tale, she remained silent and continued to listen to his story. The young lady, who has been confined in the hospital, was very happy that her sister was slowly becoming popular. Because of this, she decided to help her in any way that she could. Since she couldn't really go anywhere, she decided to create an account and named it Little Un. At that moment, the sound of breaking reached Lux's ears, making him raise his head. Who are you? Lucy asked. How did you know about this? Do you know my sister? Answer me. Even though Lucy was glaring at Lux, the half-elf remained composed and continued to tell his story. She tried to help her sister by fighting against the trolls who were bashing her on the internet. However, Little Unadar was a kind soul. She was easily affected by the hate of those who were targeting her sister and didn't know what to do next. That was until she met someone named Moon Knight 69. The two became good friends, and together, they protected the rising idol named Luna. When the popular idol managed to gather enough funds, she immediately used it to let her sister, Anna Williams, undertake her operation. Please, stop, Lucy said before covering her mouth with her hands as tears streamed down her eyes. Lux nodded before waving his hand. The broken pieces of glass on the floor merged together, and the tea that had soaked the carpet disappeared, not leaving a trace behind. Lucy was too distraught to pay attention to this as she cried. He wanted to hug her, but he knew that he couldn't do that. Several minutes passed before Lucy finally regained enough composure to sit back down and look at her guest with reddened eyes. Just who are you? Lucy asked. How did you know about my sister? I am Moon Knight 69, Lux replied, and I came from a world very far from this place. Lux snapped his finger, and the elements gathered to create a blue world, similar to Earth. The young lady looked at the hovering world in front of her in disbelief. She even reached out to touch it to check if it was real. She touched the land, and it felt like soil. She touched the sea, and it was indeed wet with water. Then the world collapsed and reformed once again. This time, it created a portrait of a doll-like beauty who was looking back at Lucy, making the latter cover her mouth as tears once again threatened to fall from her eyes. The portrait in front of her, made from different elements, looked very much like a younger version of her sister. Lucy didn't know if she was dreaming or not, but everything that she was seeing was so unbelievable that only a dream could make it possible. Luna, Lux said with a gentle look on his face. Although you might not believe it, your sister currently lives in the same world that I do. Even from far away, she still thinks of you. The half-elf then raised his hand, making Anna's portrait disappear. Do you want to hear more stories about your sister? Lux asked. Luna didn't answer right away. Instead, she pinched herself, making her face wince in pain. I'm not dreaming, right? Luna asked. Actually, I want to ask you the same question, Lux replied. Am I dreaming? Because it is impossible for me to be here on Earth. At that moment, Luna's phone rang, disrupting their conversation. Hello? Luna said as she picked up the phone. Luna, where are you? I want to talk about your next project. Sorry, manager, Luna replied. Please cancel it for now. I want to take a leave for a week. I don't want to be bothered during that time. What? This project is the one you always wanted. How CA? Luna decisively ended the call and turned off her phone. Right now, nothing was more important than hearing what Lux was going to say. Although she found his words and magic unbelievable, she decided to accept it for now and hear stories about her sister. The death of her sibling had caused her endless grief and pain. Although it had been many years since Aina died, she still hadn't forgotten her. Luna loved her sister so much and even prayed that if there was an afterlife, she hoped that they would become sisters again in that lifetime. I don't know if we're both dreaming, Luna said after a minute of silence, but I'd like to hear more about my sister. Please, tell me everything that you know. The half-elf nodded and began his tale. A story that made the popular idol momentarily forget about the big project that she canceled, despite wanting to get it for the past 3 years of her career. Lux stood in front of a large mall with a smile on his face. A day had passed since he had found himself on Earth, and with Luna's help, he visited the places where he had spent most of his time back in his past life. After Lux told her everything he could about Solais and Elysium, including the details involving Aina's life, Luna took a 1-week leave from work and holed herself up inside her room. Lux didn't want to disturb her too much and only asked her to give him some pocket money in exchange for gold and other precious gems in his possession. After the transaction was completed, he left Luna's apartment and headed to the mall after visiting a few places. He bought 10 cell phones, SIM cards, and 10 power banks, making the owner and the rest of the customers give him some weird looks. Fortunately, he was good-looking, so their weird gazes gradually turned into looks of appreciation. Of course, their gazes would often land on his slightly long ears, but they simply thought that he was a cosplayer. There were plenty of people who were into that trend nowadays, so seeing things like this wasn't enough to alarm anyone. Also, during the past 2 years, there had been some visitors from the world called Hestia, who brought a lot of surprises for the people on Earth. The most popular of them all was none other than a rainbow-colored anteater named Kazaganaga, who had become a worldwide sensation with his hit single, I Am Rolling, that sold billions of copies around the world. Next, I'll buy solar panels, Lux muttered. Elysium didn't have the technology to charge the cell phones, so he decided to install solar panels in his guild headquarters, allowing his lovers to have a place to charge their phones. Of course, he didn't need the phones to communicate with his lovers because he had the guild chat. However, he was certain that once they understood how they worked, they would definitely put them to good use. Although he didn't know how he would be able to return to Solais and Elysium, he believed that if there was a way to send him to Earth, there would also be a way to return to where he came from. After getting the solar panels, Lux stored them inside the spatial closet that Hannah had created for him. This way, he would be able to store monster corpses or anything else that he wanted to without having to use his storage rings. An hour later, the half-elf stood in front of a house. This was the place where he had spent many years of his life, and he looked at it with nostalgia. Hello there, handsome. A pretty lady with long black hair walked up to him with a smile. Are you lost? Or perhaps you're a friend of one of my sisters? I'm not lost, Lux replied as he looked at his sister, whom he hadn't seen for many years. I'm just thinking that this house looks good. Does it? The pretty lady looked at her house in curiosity. She had never paid any attention to what her house looked like because it was nothing special. Compared to the mansions of the rich and famous, their house looked normal, like the other houses in their neighborhood. Do you want to come inside? The pretty lady asked. This is actually my house. At this time, no one is at home. The pretty lady then moved close to Lux and held onto his arm. Come, I'll give you a tour of the house. Do you casually invite strangers you've just met inside your home? Lux asked, raising an eyebrow. I don't, the pretty lady replied. But somehow, I don't think that you are a bad person. How about it? Would you like to take a look inside? Why not? Lux shrugged. He didn't have any plans on entering his old home and simply wanted to look at it from a distance. But now that he had the opportunity to enter it, he decided to accept his sister's invitation. The pretty lady who was inviting him inside the house was actually his youngest sister, Jennifer. When he died, Jennifer was only 14 years old. Among his siblings, she was the one who didn't interact much with him. Based on his memory, Jennifer didn't particularly like or hate him. Their relationship was good, and she didn't disdain calling him her brother in public. She's 20 years old by now, Lux thought. This still feels surreal to me. Lux never thought that he would get the opportunity to visit his family in his current lifetime. Truth be told, he was very curious to see how they were faring now that 6 years had passed. The house looked almost the same in his memory, with the exception of new furniture that made the place look brighter. "Please sit down," Jennifer said. "I'll go get some snacks." Lux nodded and watched his sister open the fridge to see whether there was something that she could serve her guest. A minute later, she brought out a bottle of lemonade and took some fish crackers from the shelf, which made the half-elf almost chuckle. Lemonade and fish crackers? Lux looked at the food offered to him with a calm expression on his face. Seriously? Jennifer was paying close attention to Lux's reaction. Truth be told, she was a little embarrassed, but there was no other food in the house. She had placed a slice of cake in the fridge yesterday, but seeing that it wasn't there anymore, there was a high chance that one of her sisters had eaten it without her permission. The half-elf took a bite of the fish cracker, creating a crisp sound that spread inside the living room. "Delicious," Lux said. "It has been nearly 18 years since I ate fish crackers. Thank you for letting me remember how good it is." "Oh, please," Jennifer rolled her eyes. "How can you possibly not eat fish crackers in that span of time? You look very young. How old are you?" "Almost 18. And you say you haven't eaten fish crackers for that period of time? Nice try." Lux could only smile bitterly as he continued to eat the fish crackers that were served to him by his sister. A few minutes later, the door of the house opened and 3 people entered the house. Lux's gaze landed on a lady who was in her early 50s. Standing beside her was a young man who was in his mid-20s and a young lady in her late 20s. They were none other than his younger brother and sister, who had grown a lot in the 6 years since he saw them last. "You lied to me," Jennifer said with a pout as he looked at the handsome young man in front of her with a face filled with injustice. "Why didn't you tell me that you were Lucien's friend?" "I'm sorry," Lux replied. "I just thought that it wasn't a good time to tell you that I was one of his friends when we met earlier." Now that his family, with the exception of his father, was at home, he decided to experiment a bit to see their reaction after introducing himself as Lucien's friend. To his surprise, none of them said anything bad about him. They even looked sad after his name was mentioned. This surprised Lux because his mother, young brother, and younger sister, with the exception of Jennifer, always treated him like he was the greatest shame of their family when he was alive. His mother had been especially harsh on him, often telling him that his birth was a mistake when he was still alive. Seeing her saddened look made the half-elf sneer inside his heart because he had a feeling that his mother was just putting up an act like she always did in the past. "I always believed that he would change for the better," his mother, Sarah, said. "But he never changed despite my efforts to redirect him to the right path. I'm a failure of a mother." "You certainly are," Lux thought. "My brother was my idol," Benjamin stated. "He always helped me with my studies, especially calculus. T. Anything above MDS is beyond me." Lux was doing his best not to roll his eyes at his brother's shamelessness. Between the two of them, the latter was a math genius, so he didn't need any help, especially not from him. "Brother always gave me money to buy everything I needed, including trendy clothes and bags," Jessica said. "In fact, this bag I'm wearing is something I bought with his money." "Damn right, you be *TSH. You stole my credit card and maxed it out in a day." Lux did his best to keep himself from slapping the liar in front of him. My brother gave me gifts on my birthdays," Jennifer stated. "He was a good person." "Well, you pass, I guess," Lux smiled. He gazed at everyone in the family before an idea struck him. "If possible, can I see his room?" Lux asked. "His room?" Sarah frowned. "I'm sorry. After he died, we turned his room into a storage room. There's nothing to see there." "I see." Lux nodded in understanding. He stayed half an hour longer before leaving the house. Jennifer accompanied him outside because she was the one who invited him to their home. You said that your brother had given you a gift on your birthdays, right? Lux asked. Jennifer nodded. Yes. So, since he died, he hasn't given you a gift for 6 years, am I right? Lux inquired. Yes. Jennifer tilted her head in confusion. Is there a problem with that, Lux? Lux shook his head. No. Actually, since I'm already here, why don't I give you a gift in his stead? The half-elf pretended to take something from his pocket. However, he actually used his spatial storage to take out a handful of gems and place them in Jennifer's hand. Consider this your brother's gifts for the birthdays that he missed, Lux said. Thank you for inviting me to your home, and next time, be sure not to invite strangers inside your house again, okay? You're lucky I'm not a bad person. After saying those words, Lux walked away without looking back. He didn't even respond when Jennifer called out to him. Instead, he ran away, leaving her behind. When he was certain that he had managed to shake her off, he heaved a sigh and looked up at the sky. I guess I expected too much from them, Lux thought. It was at that moment when the images of his grandma Vera appeared inside his head. She was a person who treated him like a real member of her family and raised him with love and care. Then, he saw the images of Iris, Alexander, Alicia, and the people from Wildguard Stronghold. They had been with him the longest, and all of them cared for him in their own way. Before long, the images of his lovers appeared before him. This made his heart ache, especially when he thought of the possibility of never being able to see them again. I need to go back, Lux thought. They are waiting for me. Lux clenched his fists together before pulling back his hood to cover his head. He then walked into an empty alley before shooting up into the sky in a blur. His draconic wings flapped behind his back at a very fast rate, making him turn into a black speck in the sky. As he hovered high above the clouds, he extended his senses, hoping to find any sort of reaction that would lead him back to the place where he rightfully belonged. He didn't know what happened after he faced Daniel, but before he lost consciousness, he heard Ariel's assuring voice, telling him that he would not allow Daniel to have his way. Lux believed that the god of games wouldn't lie to him, so he focused his attention on finding a way back home. But even after expanding his senses, he was unable to sense anything that might help him in his quest. Suddenly, the skies above his head turned dark, and he found himself frozen in place. A moment later, countless glowing golden orbs floated around him. Lux felt all the hairs on his body stand on end when he saw that these glowing orbs actually had an eye on them. They all looked at the half-elf at the same time, and for some reason, he felt as if these golden eyes were looking at him with varying degrees of emotions. Some of the eyes looked at him with pity, curiosity, anger, sadness, disdain, happiness, excitement, and a myriad of other emotions that he couldn't describe. However, one thing was certain. He felt as if he was in the presence of a being that was akin to a god. And that being spoke in his head and asked him a single question. If your life was a novel, what would the title be, and how would your story end?
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.